Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it through another week. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Mwenda and Cornell, Robert, Joshua, Sam, and Ariana from San Jose. I was just there last week. Good times. Great to see you all. Hope you're all excited for the weekend and another masterclass. What number is this? 106. We've been at this for 106 weeks. It's a lot of content. All right, let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. If you caught the last masterclass, not last week, but the week after, you have probably seen that we started off designing an email application. This one right over here. And this is more or less what we got through. We got through most of it, which is great. But we have more to do. We're going to add some interactions today, and maybe we'll add a dark version. Could be a lot of fun. Also a fun challenge too. And I'll talk more about that if we do get to that point. All right, we've got Chris, great to see you, and AKT and Brett from Hamilton, Ontario. I need to get back to Ontario at some point. One of these days I'll get back. All right, so here's where we ended off last masterclass, last live masterclass. Last week was a replay because I was in San Jose, as I mentioned earlier. All right, so what we're going to do here is I want to focus a little bit on our video player. So in this email application, right, we went through and we designed out the sidebar. We designed a little bit of it, then I did a Martha Stewart moment and I added the rest in because we've designed many sidebars before. Ankita in Toronto, yes, indeed. We have our inbox over here to the left, and we have a list of messages. And one thing I'll probably want to do, if we have some time, is add some hover effects, so that when you're kind of moving your cursor over these messages, which are all Wade at the moment. Wade's been blasting my inbox, as you can see here. Sorry, Wade, are you in the chat? I think you are. There you are. So maybe I'll add some hover effects. And then over here to the right, we have our actual message. And this message is consisted of, we have our content here, which is built using a stack, and we have some information at the top about the sender and the receiver, right? But one thing I would love to do right now is build out this video player so that we can interact with it, right? At the moment, the way we set it up the last masterclass is when we launch the preview, we can click on the video and it plays, which is fine. But right now there's no indication that you can click on it, right? Unless you know it's a video. And that's really not the way things work in the video world, right? So, of course, we could dive in here and change the video to play automatically. But I don't know about you, if I were to launch an email and all of a sudden the video's playing, it would annoy me, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to change this to no playback, just like this. And we want to build a component with several states so that not only is there a play button that lets a user know that you can click or tap on this video to play, but it also might go to a loading state, and then it's going to go to another state that's going to play the video. Wade says, sorry, Howard, I'll do better. Thank you. All right. Now, one thing that I should point out is if you're working with videos in Adobe XD, it's very easy to replace a video. So, we have this really interesting looking iguana lizard chameleon thing, whatever. I don't know exactly what it is. Let me know in the chat if you know what it is. But you may want something different. You may want this adorable looking, I think it's a corgi. It's definitely a dog. That much I know. So you can just drag it. Finder does these weird things. Like this folder wasn't even here just a second ago when I started dragging this video. I don't know where this folder came from. Good thing it wasn't anything confidential. But anyways, you can just drag it onto an existing video and it's going to replace it, right? And again, you can change it to play automatically, and we have a very cute video, which is great, right? Let's go back to our iguana lizard chameleon thing. All right. So we have our video, but again, we want to create a component with several states. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my mask group, and I'm going to call this video. And over within the properties inspector to the right, or you can use the Command or Control K shortcut, boop, I will create a component. And this will be our main component because it is not nested. inside of a larger component. And now that I have my component in place, I can make some changes. So the initial state, like I mentioned, I want it to have a play button of some sort to let users know that they can tap on it. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, shortcut key E, and drag one out. I'm going to make it nice and large so that it's easily visible. And maybe I'll change the color to, let's go for this nice little blurple. I love using blurple. It's a great color, it's a great name. And you know, one thing we should probably do, because if I turn off the border here, you're going to notice that it's vibrating quite a bit. Not physically, it's not actually moving, but because we have this very interesting specific color for the play button, or what will be a play button, and we have a lot of different colors behind it, there's like, things are happening, right? And I don't like it. No one likes it. And of course, we can change the color to maybe another, blue or red or something that kind of works with this particular video. But you have to keep in mind that that color doesn't work with anything. But you have to keep in mind that the video in the back will not always be this video of this lizard, chameleon, iguana thing, right? So we need some way to separate this play button. And, simply we can maybe add a bit of a border, maybe a white border on the outside possibly. Something like that, right? Now, of course, if you have a white video or white image in the background, there may be some blending and, melding going on. So there's a solution to that, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. Now, inside of this play button, we're going to need the actual play icon, right? Which you can grab from an icon library, you can grab from all sorts of different places, or you can grab the good old polygon tool over here to the left, boop, and draw one out. Maybe I'll rotate it, holding down shift to constrain it 15 degrees at a time. And, maybe we'll just round at the corners just a little bit. And now we have a cute little polygon, right? Just like that. I'm going to play this, and that looks pretty good. Now, one thing I'll mention is, visual centering is a thing, right? If I were to actually center this, it doesn't line up really well. Even if there wasn't this gap over here to the right, it still wouldn't line up. So you want to make sure that it's visually centered. And the best way to do that is just to launch your preview, take a quick look at it, maybe step back a little bit, squint, tilt your head, the things designers typically do. And that looks pretty good right about there. Now, I did mention that, sometimes, it'll just blend in a little bit too much. And I think in this case, we do have a nice preview of this iguana lizard chameleon thing in the background. We might just want a bit of an overlay. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, or I can even grab this mask layer right here and duplicate it. And then maybe set the color to black, and then drop the opacity, maybe some around 30%, something like that. Now, of course, you could potentially use a background blur to get a little bit fancy. I don't know if it's really necessary, but, let's try it out. Background blur. In this case, the blur is way too much. Usually, when I'm working with background blurs, I take the blur all the way up to 50, right? But for an element like this, you kind of want to be able to see that preview in the background. So, somewhere around maybe 5 looks pretty good. And then I'm going to darken it a little bit, maybe to 0. And then I'm going to bring up the effect opacity, right? Something like that. And that looks okay. I might even drop this a little bit more so we have a very subtle blur. It doesn't look bad, but is it necessary? Possibly, right? So I'm going to turn off that background blur and just maybe drop the opacity of this layer to about maybe 30%. And there we go. Now we have our preview and a play button on top of it. I'm going to make sure to group these layers, call this play, and now we have our play button and we have our video in the background. And when we launch the preview, the video does not play. But we do want to make sure, I think the play button's a little bit too large, actually. Nope. Wrong layer. There we go. That could work. All right, so we want to make sure that when we tap on this particular play button, it either plays the video or it loads the video first, or fake loads the video, and then it plays the video. And I think that could be interesting because it also will, I'll be able to talk about the end of playback trigger. So with my component selected, I'm going to go ahead and press the plus button, and we're going to create a new state. Although, how fancy do we want to get with this? You know what? Let's go get very fancy. We're gonna create a hover state, and we're gonna keep this very simple. We don't want to go too crazy with this, but maybe for the hover state, we'll just enlarge this a little bit. Maybe we will grab this overlay and drop the opacity just a little bit, right? Maybe to 10%. So now we have our default state, and we can hover, and ooh, look at that. All right, that's kind of fancy, right? Not too fancy, but fancy. Okay, now what we want to do is we want another state that will allow the loading animation to kick off. So I'm going to press the plus button, just like that. We're going to create a new state, and I'm going to call this loading. And now what we want to do here is we want to display some sort of loading animation. There are a lot of different ways we can get loading animations in, but we're going to be using a lottie file. So I'm going to start by hiding this polygon. Don't need that. And we can probably use this ellipse as the mask for that loading animation, right? Now, in terms of lottie files, a lot of different ways, a lot of places we can get lottie files, including we have Finder over here. So I have some local lottie files, which I can grab, and this one's kind of fun. That's not bad. And we have this one over here. You may have seen this. That's a pretty simple one. You may have seen this during my demo of Lottie last year at Adobe Max. So I can just pop that in there. It's a little bit difficult to see right now because it's an initial state. It's a little bit small, right? But I can dive in here, grab that Lottie animation, play automatically. Let's see what that looks like. So it's kind of there, right? I might want to make it a little bit larger. It's there. And I wonder if I should probably darken this a little bit so we can see that Lottie animation. That's not bad. Now, another place you can get Lottie animations is with the Lottie Files plugin. So if I hop down here to my plugins at the bottom left-hand corner, I do have the Lottie Files plugin already loaded, and I can type out something like loading. And we have some fun loading animations. All of these you can use in your projects, which is wonderful. And I can just grab one and boop, pop it into place. And we know, oh, that's a terrible color. Now, if you do want to edit the colors of a Lottie file, if you go to lottiefiles.com/editor or edit, I think it's editor, you'll be able to edit the colors of any vector layers that are part of a Lottie file. Now, that one in particular, not loving the color. That one's not too bad. Not too bad. But I think I might stick with this one over here. Or if I go back to Finder, we've got this impossible ring type. It's not bad. I think this one's nice and simple. We're going to keep that. Becca says, whoa, now we're getting fancy. Absolutely. All right. So we have our Lottie file, right? And we can probably at this point start to wire up this component just a little bit. You know, we already have our default state, we have our hover state, and now we want to go from our hover state to our loading state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into prototype mode, and we want to select the element that users will tap on to activate the next state and the interaction. So I'm going to click on the play button. I'm going to click on the handle to the right, and then within the properties inspector over to the right as well, we're going to choose a transition with no animation. Because in this case, there's really nothing animating between the two different states. So we want that Lottie animation to kick off immediately, which is why we selected transition with no animation. And then the destination, we're going to go ahead and choose our loading state, just like that, right? So if we go back to our default state, we can press play at the top. We've got our video, it looks great. We can hover to see our little subtle animation, and then we can click, and it's going to go to our loading state. Now, one thing that we may consider, right, if I go back for a second, this is in the hover state leading to the loading state. In many cases, when you're dealing with a video online, it's not, the interaction's not restricted to the play button. In many cases, you can click anywhere on the video to actually play the video, right, or load the video. So instead of having the interaction kind of sprout out from the play button itself, boop, I'm going to select the entire video. Transition, no animation, and then go to our loading state. That way, no matter where my cursor is on this particular state, I can click anywhere and it's going to transition over to that loading Lottie animation, right? So that looks pretty good. But at this point, what we want to happen is we want the state to be able to advance automatically to another state that will play the video, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start by creating another state with the video playing. So I'm going to press the plus button. Let's hop into design mode, plus, and then new state, and we'll call this playing. And on this particular state, we don't want the play button, so I'll hide that. And on the video, we don't want the overlay, and we do want the video to play automatically. So we're going to switch it over from no playback over here within the properties inspector to play automatically. And again, that will allow this video to play. Now, one thing I should point out is beside this dropdown, we have our heads up display where you can further customize your video. You can add a thumbnail if you want to, which is good in this case, not this particular state, but the initial state. If you wanted to display maybe a high resolution image of an iguana lizard chameleon thing, you can add a thumbnail that will display when the video is not playing. You can scrub through the video. You can mute the video if it does have audio. You can also trim the video. Now in this case, it's only 6 seconds, so we're not going to really worry about trimming. But it's good to have if you have a much longer video and you either want it to start at a certain location or you want it to end a little bit early. And it's all non-destructive. And you can also loop the playback, which maybe we'll keep off for now, and I'll show you why in a second. All right, so we have that looking pretty good, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go to my loading state, and we have our lottie animation right here. Now, what I want to happen is once that lottie animation finishes playing back, in this case, it's that loading animation, I want it to automatically advance to the next state. So I'm going to hop into prototype mode, and you can see right over here to the right, we already have a little interaction sprouting out from our lottie animation. And this is what allows the animation to play back immediately. This is the time trigger that's part of the animation. But we want an additional interaction. So I'm going to press the plus button. And over to the right, we can choose an additional interaction. Tap, drag, hover, yada, yada, yada. But in this case, we want end of playback. And this will tell Adobe XD that when the animation finishes playing back and looping is not turned on, it's going to perform the action down below. So in this case, we'll stick with transition, destination. We're going to go to our playing state that we just created, and no animation. Now we could potentially do a little bit of a dissolve, but it may not be necessary. And before we play this, one thing I might want to do is from the playing state, we might want to set up 2 interactions. One, we might want if someone taps on the video. I'm thinking of ways to get even fancier. Maybe we'll get to that in a second. But if someone taps on the video, it'll go to the default state where it's paused, right? So I'm going to go to a transition and our default state. But also, if I select the video, we have our time trigger. I'm going to add an interaction to this. Maybe once the video finishes playing back, so end of playback on the video as well, it'll go to the default state. Because maybe, you just want one playback and then it'll automatically go to a previous state, right? Might get fancy in a second. All right, so we have our video basically complete. We have our default state, we have our hover state, which leads to our loading state, which then leads to our playing state, and then goes back to our hover or default state. Let's see. Cornell says, Uncle Google says it's a chameleon. It probably is, but I'm going to keep calling it a chameleon iguana lizard thing because it's great. All right, so we have our hover state, right? Now we can click, it loads, and it automatically advances over to the playing state. And when this is finished, it should automatically advance or go back to the default state, as you can see there. Beautiful, right? Nice circle of life, circle interaction, whatever you might want to call it, right? All right, one more thing I might want to do. Back in our playing state, we might want, now I don't know if this is going to work or not. I mean, it should work. Maybe it won't. I don't. We're going to try it out. Maybe on this particular element, when the video is playing, you might want to be able to hover over top of the video and reveal maybe a pause button, for example, right? And will that work? Because I think if you advance, but then again, if it's auto animate, I'm thinking this through in my head because this was not planned. It may work, it may not work. We're going to see what's going to happen, right? We're going to create another state. And this is going to be the playing hover state. All right. Now in here, what we want is maybe we'll reveal the overlay. We'll bring back the play icon. But in this case, we don't want a polygon. We actually want a rectangle. Something like this. Maybe we'll round out the corners just a little bit. You don't want to go too much on these pause buttons. And we'll drag that over, center it. That looks pretty fancy, right? There we go. We can probably keep it at the same color, maybe. Or we can do something like this, just so it's not too in your face, right? Yeah, let's keep it the same color, all right? There we go. Wade says we're going to do it live. Indeed. It may work. I don't know. It may not. Probably won't. All right, so we have our play button, which now caused, we'll keep it as play. All right, so we have this, and we want to make sure that on this state, the video is still playing automatically. And if I'm thinking of it through correctly, if we do use auto animate from our playing state to our playing hover state, the video should continuously and seamlessly play back. I hope. All right, so from our playing state, what we're gonna wanna do is create a hover state. So I'm gonna make sure to click on the plus button to the right. We're gonna choose a hover right over here. We're gonna transition to our playing hover state, but we wanna make sure to use auto animate. Now for this example, I'm gonna keep it at transition so I can show you what I hope will be what we don't want to happen, and then hopefully we'll change it to auto animate and it will work properly. Maybe. All right. So default state. We have our hover. That's all good. We're playing. Video is going to play back, and we can hover. Did you notice that? Right? What? Bit. The video kind of jerks a little bit, and that's because we have a transition instead of auto animate. If this works properly, we should be able to go to playing, grab our hover state, and then change the type to auto animate. Now we don't really need to worry too much about the easing options. We'll keep it very simple, easing basically nothing, right? We can even go 0.01. But the important part is that auto animate is the type in this particular situation, right? Let's try it one more time. Cross our fingers. We've got our hover state. Yep, there we go. I lagged for a second, and that's gonna play, and then, aha, look at that. And then click, and it goes back to the beginning. Beautiful, it worked. Whew, all right. So there's our completed interaction. We have our video player with our default state. We have our hover state, which kind of enlarges just a little bit. We have a loading state with a lottie animation, our playing state, and our playing hover state. And if I'm thinking of this through correctly, we should be able to change the video if we wanted to on our default state, and it'll push that to all the other states within this component. So if I go down here, let's go ahead and just hide this for a second. Hop over to Finder. I lost my videos. Oh, that's what happened when this random folder popped up. Okay, let me put this over here. Okay, just to make sure nothing confidential pops up. We have this monkey thing. Boop. There we go. Bring that back. Look at that. It pushes it to all the different states. So we can hover. Loading animation. Looks like the video is a little bit of a different aspect ratio, so it pushed it in a little bit, but it still works, right? Which is great. All right, let's go ahead and bring back our chameleon lizard iguana thing. And that's looking pretty good. All right. So we've gone ahead and created our video player. And now what we want to do, we want to kind of fill in the gaps of this particular email application. So maybe at the top here, we're missing a bunch of icons that would allow a user to maybe reply all, forward, delete, all sorts of different things, right? So what we can do is we can start filling in this area, and there are many ways to get icons into XD. If you've been watching my masterclasses, you know that we have a ton of different plugins that can do that. You can also grab, icons from a personal library that might be on your computer or in a third-party icon manager. But if I hop over to the Icons for Design plugin, I can look up something like reply. And we've got reply, we've got reply all, so we can start there, right? These are from the awesome library. So there's reply. I'm not going to worry about alignment and distribution in a little bit. Reply all. And then for forward, I mean, we could, of course, type out forward, and you know, we probably have an icon somewhere in here, but it's literally just the reply icon flipped. So I'm going to duplicate this over to the right, and then within the properties inspector, boop, flip it over. All right. So we have a few icons looking pretty good. Now at this point, what I might want to do to make my life a little bit easier, I might want to start placing these into a group and then turning a stack on. So if I go ahead and click on these 3 icons, I do have them all selected. I'm going to pop them into a plop, I suppose. Command and Control G, and I'll call this icons. And over within the properties inspector, I will turn a stack on, just like that. Now it's automatically defined that stack as a horizontal stack because that's the direction those icons are laid out. And it also determined that there are 34 pixels in between, which maybe I'll bump up to 40. Something like that, right? In terms of the size, ooh, those icons are looking a little bit large. Let me dive in here. Let's see if I can make these a bit smaller. I do have a stack on, so that's, I'm gonna turn that off for a second. That might be a little bit better. Possibly still a little bit too large. 24 maybe? That could do. And I think the color, right now it's set to probably a pure black. I think we might want to bring that back a little bit, right? So if we go ahead and hop open the fill, I might want to do something like this. Now, you probably don't want to do something like this because accessibility, definitely a thing. You want to make sure that all of your users can see this. And just to show you, if I hop over to my plugins and go to the Stark plugin, right? I will select one of the icons, open up the contrast section, and it's going to scream at me. And it's going to let me know that none of this passes because it's essentially looked at this icon here that I have selected. And then it's looked at what's behind it. And it's, you know, compared that contrast ratio, and it's just not going to do it. And like I always tell you all, you know, even though I can see this icon very well, and even though you all can see this icon very well, or many of you maybe, not everyone can, right? So it's, you know, definitely need to make some changes. Now, one thing that's nice about the Stark plugin is that when I have an icon selected, it's going to give me some suggestions down here. Now, if I were to click on one of them, I do need a pro account to actually apply it, but I can grab my eyedropper and click, right? So I can grab any of these colors here. Now, this one's obviously not going to work, but that could work. Or if I go back to that color I was using before, nope, that's not going to pass. That passes AA 3:1. Aha, there we go. Now you don't necessarily have to pass AAA 7:1, but as long as you're getting at least 3 check marks, you're probably doing pretty well, right? Now, if I drop this a little bit more, we can get to the 7:1. But somewhere in this range here, right about there, that should work, right? So I'm going to make sure to apply that to these icons as well, and I'm probably going to make sure to add this color to my document assets. Boop, there we go. All right. You know what? Maybe I'll just add a little bit more blue in. All right, so we have our first set of icons complete. And now what we want a few additional ones. Things like delete and archive and maybe a move icon as well. But we may want to separate some of these icons just so that they're not all kind of clumped into one row. So what I'm going to do is inside of this stack, I'm going to grab my line tool, draw one out. I can apply this color, which might be a little bit too jarring, but we're going to see what that looks like. And then to the right, we're going to want another icon. So let's go ahead and back over to icons for design, delete. Now this may not work inside of a stack. So what I'm going to also do is pop open Nucleo. Let's look up trash, for example. Let's see. I have so many. That's the problem when you have so many icons. Is you don't know what you don't even know where to start, right? delete. I know there's a specific icon I'm looking for that is just a very adorable trash can icon. I think it might be part of, oh, here it is. It's part of the Cocoa library. I think this is from UI 8. It's just cute. Never thought I would call a trash icon cute, but you know, it is. I'm also going to add some guides here, just so that everything lines up really nicely. Now, one thing I have to keep in mind when I'm resizing these icons is on some of these icons that I've imported, there is a shape in the background, you know, so it kind of, we can't use the exact same dimensions as these icons here. So I can either, you know, make sure this shape is the same size of the icon, or just delete it, right? And then I can resize this up. There we go. And the next one I might want is maybe an archive. And this one's not too bad. I think this is from Font Awesome. Yes, it is. And yeah, I think that one's okay. Now, the thing with this icon, the Font Awesome icons, when you license them, are massive. So this is 512. So when I do go ahead and bring this in, it's gonna explode all over the place, right? But I can just make this a little bit smaller. And this has the same shape in the background. I'm gonna just get rid of that. Bring that up. All right. Ooh, that looks very large, doesn't it? And then we may also want maybe a move. Now there's nothing great there. Let's look up folder for a second. Now, of course, you can also, you know, create your own icons pretty easily. I mean, this is just a rectangle with, you know, 2 rounded corners at the bottom, little rounded rectangle on the inside, right? So maybe I'll grab this icon here, which is from Unicon. Pop that in here. Still looking pretty good. I'm pretty big. And then maybe on the inside, we might just want a bit of an arrow, right? Let me turn this on, and whoop, whoop. It's a very large arrow. That's smaller. And something like that, right? Maybe. That could work. Not perfect, but it will work. And then we might want one more separator. Now this one over here, I think I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller. I might bring the opacity down a little bit. I'm gonna duplicate this over to the right over here. And then we might want a few additional icons, maybe things like a bookmark, mark as unread, maybe a print icon. Do people still print emails? I don't know. Bookmark. That one looks fun. Pop that in there. There we go. And then we might want a mark as unread. Now, if I think I look up unread, and we're not going to get very much. Not bad, but it doesn't really match the style. I'll look up envelope. I want something that kind of matches either Cocoa or Unicon. Maybe message. Aha, here we go. So we have this cute little envelope here, or even this one over here. I'm going to go ahead and grab this one. And then what we're going to want to do, we're going to want to indicate that you can click on this and mark something as unread. So I'm going to make sure inside of this icon, grab an ellipse, draw one out. Also want to make sure to use the same color. And then on the outside, we'll just add a bit of a border, or you can use a subtract Boolean object. My mind just went blank. Bump that up just a little bit. Maybe 1, maybe 1.5, I don't know. Welcome to design, people. Welcome to design. All right, not great, but it'll work. And then finally, we might want a print icon. Not loving that one. That one's not too bad. It's a little bit more traditional. It's not as fancy and curvy, but I think that could potentially work. So I'll grab that one and pop that in there. And there we go. All right, so we have all of our icons looking pretty decent. I'm gonna make sure to snap this over to the left, and that looks okay. I think that could work. And then possibly, you know, maybe over to the right, you may want another set of icons that's separated from this group. Things like maybe a calendar icon, notifications, and possibly settings. So we're gonna go through and just wrap the icons up. And we'll do calendar. Ooh, helps if I spell properly. That one looks pretty good. And then we might want a bell or notifications. And then settings. All right, just like before, I'm going to place these into a group, Command and Control G. These will be icons on the right, and then we're going to turn a stack on, 40, sample the color, and we're good to go. Now these icons over here are about 55.5. That's a terrible number, but I'll worry about that later. There we go. All right, that could work. I think they're also a little bit too high up. Perfect. Okay, so we have our icons looking pretty decent. Now, one thing I also mentioned that I might want to do is in this section over here, we might want to add some hover effects, right? So that when we do move it over top of these message previews, we can get some sort of interaction that just kind of lights them up a little bit. Now, there are a few ways we can do it. We can either build it into, were these made as components? They were not, but if they were, you can potentially build them into that component. But what I kind of like to do is have them separated so that it's a little bit easier to update. You can just kind of move your cursor down and it just does its thing, right? So what I want to do is I'm going to start outside of the messages group, because there's a stack on it at the moment. I'm going to draw out a rectangle just like that. It's going to snap really nicely, and I'm going to, let's see, white. No, that's probably not going to work. Let's go a little bit darker. Multiply. No, it's probably too dark. But if I move it in the back, so this is the initial color. You might want to just either darken it a little bit or brighten it a little bit. I think we're going to darken it a touch. CJ says, Wade emails Howard a lot, indeed. And he never says anything exciting. Just says preview of the body message. Come on, Wade, step it up. All right, so we're going to leave it right about there. And what we want to do now is set up a hover so that, again, when we move our cursor down, it just kind of does its thing, right? And we do have these other rectangles. This is for the active message. And this can be our hover. Now, on the initial state, we basically don't want it to be visible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the opacity and drag it all the way down to 0. Then we're going to turn this into a component. I'm going to press the plus button, and then we're going to press the plus button one more time and create a hover state. Now, even though this hover state is wired up by default, as you saw with the lightning icon, we're going to jump into prototype mode in just a moment. Now, on the hover state, all we want to do is grab the layer and bring it back up to 100%. So now we have our default state. If I preview, we can hover over top of it and we get a nice little hover going on. Now, I did mention we're going to go into prototype mode for just a second. But before we do that, I'm going to place this hover. Whoops. Where did it go? Into a group, Command and Control G. I'll call this hovers. And then I'm going to turn a stack on. Or we can also use a repeat grid. But I'm going to turn a stack on that's going vertically down. And I'm going to duplicate and duplicate. Oops. Duplicate, duplicate, and duplicate. And I want to make sure that we have the same spacing as the other layers. Now this one here, I think throws it off a little bit, I think. Yeah, I think this throws it off a little bit because this is a different size. So I messed that up a touch. But that's totally fine. So we have this one here. This one we don't even need, right? So I can drag this down to about here. I think the size is wrong too. But what I can do, move this to the top. This is our main component. Make it a little bit smaller. Move it on down. So it's about centered, somewhere about there. Let's see. So that one, we don't need this one over here. That looks a little bit better. Slightly off still. And of course, you can also turn the hover state on so you can see what you're working with, right? That would make sense. Okay, now we're looking pretty good. So I'll just keep duplicating. We have a few. Now, if I were to press play, right? We have our hover state on this top one, right? And if I were to go down here, there's a little bit of a delay, right? Which isn't the worst thing in the world, but you might want to be able to just move your cursor all the way down this message list and just have them all kind of light up in unison, right? So I'm going to go to my main component, which is the one right here with the solid diamond, hop into prototype mode. The hover interaction will be selected by default, but we're going to want to switch it over from auto animate to transition with no animation. And because we edited the main component, it's going to push those changes to all the other ones. So if I press the play button one more time, I think I'm lagging a touch. There we go. And I can just kind of move all the way down just like that. And because we have this inside of a scroll group, it also works nicely as well, right? And we can still have our video playing. We can hover over the interactions over here to the left. Everything looks pretty fancy. I think I'm lagging a touch, but you get the idea, right? All right, so we have about 10, 13 minutes left, something like that. What I do want to do is I want to start kind of molding this to a darker experience, right? And I think this is kind of a fun challenge. I think we did this with one of our other designs, but I'm going to duplicate this downwards. And I'm going to start, let's just start on the left and we're going to move our way over to the right. So I'm going to select the sidebar and we might want to go, we're going to have kind of alternating colors. So we'll have maybe light, dark, and then maybe stick with dark over here with a little bit of lighter area at the top here, right? So let's go ahead and do something like this. And we're definitely going to have to, you know, tweak these as we go. And I'm going to definitely have to change some of these colors here. But we're going to do a little bit of a lighter color here. I might want to drop this a touch. And then over here, something a little bit darker, and the border is going to have to be dropped. Now, I think I'm seeing the background. Okay. Sample that color. Ooh, there we go. That's looking a little bit better. And then on this side here, we probably want the same color over here with a little bit of a lighter border, or even no border at all, right? Something like that, right? So that kind of sets the stage. But of course, all these elements have to be changed as well. So I'm going to dive into the Boop logo. We'll change this to maybe a pure white. This blue isn't terrible, but because of how vibrant it is and because of how dark the background is, it's a little bit, it feels a little bit too vibrant, right? So I'm going to just move this over just a little bit, just to pull some of that saturation out of this color. And I think that could work. It's a very subtle difference, but I think it's a little bit easier on the eyes. Now I'm going to go ahead and maybe I'll do the same thing over here. And this guy over here to the right, we might want something like this. And maybe we'll change this color to white. And then these, We'll do white as well. Now ideally, ideally I would have a badge component with a light and a dark state, right? But I did not set that up from the beginning. Bad, Howard. So I made my life a little bit more difficult. But that's okay, right? Select these links and layers over here. That looks pretty good. This I dropped to 10. Sample. Designing is just a lot of manual work sometimes, especially when you're kind of setting the grounds for the various versions and all these fun things that you need to do as a designer, right? Now this is another area where I probably should have had set up a component early on. In this case, a lighter version and a darker version of the message preview. Live and learn, right? What I might be able to do actually is maybe just delete. Yeah, I'll just leave it as that. Now this one over here, I'm probably going to also select. Maybe I'll add a little bit of a border, possibly. Very subtle border. I think this might be a little bit too dark. You might not be able to see it that well, so you'll probably want to bump this up a little bit. Add a little bit of blue in there. And then the search text, which is definitely the most important part of this. Definitely want to bump that up. I use the same color for the icon. These I might just want to shift to white. Nice amount of contrast over there. And then these icons here, definitely going to want to bump up as well. Actually, that was okay. And then the border we want on that color. Of course, again, you could have used created this as a Boolean object. Actually, let me show you how you can do that. So instead of worrying about the border in this situation, I'm going to duplicate this shape, make it a little bit larger, and then select. I'm going to ungroup this. Select the larger shape and this object here, and boop, there we go. Now it did also, because it was kind of cut out in the first place, we just have to basically create that shape one more time. But then you have exactly what you're looking for, right? Although it is right there, right? Let's see if this works. No, probably not. No. I guess I can probably also make this put it inside of the Boolean object as well, right? I could do that. Something like that. I'm going to copy it and then paste it into there. Oh, you know what? Because it's a border, I'm going to outline the stroke, copy it, and then paste it. There we go. Much better, right? Beautiful. All right. That looks pretty good. These look not great. That looks better. And then we're definitely going to want to bump up the contrast of these objects here, which I'll just bump up to white. That's getting there, right? I'm going to delete. You know what? While we're at this, let me go ahead and create a component from this. Let's actually go back up here. So we have our message here, right? And I'm going to go ahead and create a component, Command and Control K, and this is going to be our lighter version. And then I'm going to create a new state, and this is going to be our darker version. And essentially, I'm just going to change the color of these to white. Now you won't be able to see it that well against this background because it's, on the lighter version. But now if I copy this, hop over here, paste it, and switch it over to our darker version. And now we have our message looking pretty good. Now I can go ahead and duplicate, Much better, right? Still a lot of weights, right? All right, that's looking pretty good. So just, just with a little bit of color tweaks, but of course, there's a lot more to transitioning a design from a light version to a dark version. Things that maybe many of you may not think about. Things like the, the saturation change. Very subtle changes, but they definitely help kind of ease a user's eye when they're looking at an application like this, right? All right, so we have our video. That should still play nicely on the dark version. That looks pretty good. And while we're wrapping up, if anyone has suggestions for an application like this, of course, we can go through and add some additional interactions. Maybe on the button over here, we can add a very simple hover effect or hover state. Cornell's saying, let's do XD dark theme design when you're done with this project. Fun fact, I have already done that. But resources and priorities and yada yada yada. So no dark mode in XD yet, but I have designed it as a fun personal project. Maybe one day I'll post it if I can get permission, but I've designed the whole thing. Well, most of it, at least what you can see. It looks pretty nice, but it is what it is. Maybe one day. Go. I'm going to change this over to transition with no animation, and we now have a fun little hover effect. Very simple, very subtle, right? But it looks pretty good. One thing we can also potentially explore is maybe when the plus button is pressed over here within this section, what does that look like? Does something pop up that allows you to type in a new label or choose a different color? How does that look, right? So in this case, if I were to grab my rectangle and draw one out, it's going to push the stack down, which is doing what it should be doing, but obviously not what we want, right? So I'm going to actually design it outside of this just for now. And maybe we'll design this little section here. Add a bit of a border. Maybe round out the corners a little bit. 4 looks pretty good. Let's add a little bit of a drop shadow so it pops out. And then we'll add a touch of blue in there. Not loving that drop shadow just yet, but new label. Use the same color, probably a little bit too large. Yeah, it's probably too small now. Oh, I do not like that at all. But we're gonna run with it for now. And then maybe there'll be like a little bit of a text box in here that lets you put in the label name. Or you know what, we probably don't even have text because there's just too many boxes going on, right? So we can probably just put maybe a line. I'm trying to brainstorm this as I go. Do a little bit of a line here. And then we'll probably want some sort of placeholder text. Label name. Let's drop the weight to maybe medium. Probably too small, to be honest. Might be too small. Go for demi bold. Bump that up. I'm going to drop the color or drop the opacity a little bit just so that users know that this is some sort of a placeholder. And then maybe over to the right, we can add in the section where you can change your color. So we have that. Let's choose a different color. Maybe we'll go for like a blurple again. There we go. And we also want to make sure that users know that they can change this color. So we can either put an arrow to the side or we can put an arrow over top of it. Let's put one over top very quickly. There we go. Yeah, all of this is very small down here, so I would definitely make this bigger. I think the border is a little bit too much. I think all of it's a little bit too much, but you kind of get where I'm going with this, right? And design is all about iteration, making changes, trying new things, making text bigger and smaller, and all this fun stuff, right? It'll get there. I'll work on it. All right, that's going to wrap things up for me for today. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Stick around. Kyle T. Webster's coming up in just a few moments, and I will see you all next week. Thanks, everyone.